follows an extract from my book Letters from the Broom Cupboard, available from Amazon. Dear reader, although the vast majority of my time is spent sitting on my bottom, pointing at music and doing very little else, save talking a lot, there are times when I do actually exercise my fingers on the keyboard myself, and I do try to carve some time aside in which I can play for my own pleasure. I also play accompaniments for my woodwind pupils and in preparation tests for exams. Over many years, I've also played at innumerable weddings and funerals. It's rather humbling to acknowledge how alike most funerals are. Most of us grow up, go to school, fall in love, have a family, grow old and then die. There's a reassuring sameness about it all. I've always struggled to understand why the officiator at a funeral has to go through the whole rigmarole of giving a resume of the deceased's life throughout the ceremony. Those of us who knew the deceased already know what's being said, and those who didn't hardly care. It's the few sorrowful exceptions to the rule that stand out from all the rest. I played at a funeral of a young teenager who had tragically died in a foolish traffic accident. From all of the surrounding gossip, it transpired that the possibility of an accident had been on the cards for some time, and the wonder was that the calamity hadn't happened sooner. Not that this lessened the grief of the relatives. Even more sorrowful, as I thought, were the testimonies that the friends and family gave during the service. The only thing that anyone could say was how much they'd enjoyed sitting watching TV together. Other than being as careful as you can on the roads, there's no assurance that we'll avoid a traffic accident, but I came away from that day determined to make the most of every day and not waste it behind a flickering screen. Ordinarily, I'm quite immune to the grief that surrounds me, and I play through the hymns and various other pieces of music unaffected. However, there was one occasion that really did affect me, and I really struggled to perform my duties as I blinked through the tears. A young man who was in one of the forces had committed suicide, leaving behind him a young wife and a small daughter, an acquaintance of my children who were the same age. Apparently some question of conduct had been raised and, although it was shown that he was clear of any tarnish, he'd said that he couldn't live with the cloud hanging over him. The church was filled to overflowing and the sense of shock and loss was palpable. To this day I don't know how I managed to keep playing on through the verses. I don't think many of the congregation could keep up with the singing despite my efforts. Ours is quite a rural community, although pasturage is giving way to housing estates, and as dairy farming becomes more and more of a struggle, sectioned paddocks for horses are more common than grazing land for cattle now. Nevertheless, small farms still exist, and for the most part the farmers form a friendly cooperative and pull along together. However, a long-standing feud has existed between the Copes and the Hardacres. Nobody quite remembers the root of the trouble. It's probably buried with bygone generations. Frank Cope has handled the bulk of the dairy farming down to his son some years past, but in his late 80s he still maintained a large poultry concern and also raised a number of porkers. Only a few weeks previously he was mucking out as normal, but now I was playing for his funeral. From all that I'd heard, it was going to be quite an affair. No expense had been spared. The family had even gone so far as to recruit a particular breed of shy horse from quite some distance away to pull the hearse. I normally aim to be seated at the organ before any of the congregation are likely to arrive, so that I can make sure that I am comfortably established and my music is organised. I have a selection of appropriate music to play quietly in the background for when people begin to arrive. Music such as Bach's Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring is good, or a more modern favourite of mine is Lloyd Webber's Pie Jesu, which I have arranged for organ from a 4-part choral piece that I have sung with the choir I belong to. I make sure that I have quite a few alternatives so that there are no awkward pauses until the funeral party arrives. It seemed that Frank Copes was going to be late, as he usually had been in his life. I was getting towards the bottom of the pile of my music and there was no sign of the funeral directors. I'd not got a watch on. I can't wear a watch as it makes my wrist and fingers ache. But I presumed that the hearse would be along soon. Bach's Prelude No. 1 was the last piece of the music I'd got to go at, and there was still no sign of the coffin. A little nifty thinking on the fly and a dominant seventh chord that Bach never intended gave me the opportunity to go back to the beginning and play it all again. Although I do like the piece, it is plausible to suggest that this music could easily be described as repetitive, and so further repeats which weren't part of the original composition were getting beyond mundane. I'd have to start from the top of my music pile again. Where could the funeral party have got to? I heard some muttering in the front pew and I caught the words, "Even the organist has run out of music and started again. What's going on?" They must have been one of the first to arrive. I was hoping that nobody would notice. I could see the churchwarden and tried to catch her eye. She shuffled over to reassure me that the hearse had arrived and that the funeral party could begin soon. They were just waiting for the police to arrive. She said that she'd explain everything else later, and with that enigmatic reassurance she left me to my ad-lib repetitions until the coffin finally began its journey down the aisle and the service was underway. As the funeral progressed and the vicar recounted the usual life history, my eyes wandered. Looking out of the windows through the stained glass, I could just see the top of a policeman's helmet as he walked the circumference of the building. I was told later that the delay had been caused by a punch-up between the Copes and the Hardacres. The Hardacres had taken umbrage at either being invited or not being invited to the service, it hardly matters which. After the horses had drawn the coffin away and were turning into the church driveway, they'd blocked off the funeral car carrying the Cope family members and had hoisted the chauffeur out of the driver's seat. Stephen Hardacre, a particularly feisty member of the clan, had then taken the keys out of the car's ignition and thrown them into a nearby field to cause further obstruction. Not being a family to take such a treatment on the chin, the Copes, regardless of their mourning finery, took instant revenge with their fists. No doubt the hope and intention of the Hardacres, and a hearty punch-up was going on as I was doing the rounds, quite literally, with J.S. Bach. The service was finally able to proceed once the police escort began circling the vicinity, ensuring that any scores remaining to be settled would wait until a more polite juncture. Perhaps playing at weddings has a little less strain on the emotions, though the call to play at such functions is diminishing. This may not only be due to the fact that perhaps less people are getting married, but also because those that do wed prefer a CD of their favourite songs rather than live music. At our wedding, May and her husband played an arrangement of Mozart's Romance, the second movement of Eine kleine Nachtmusik, on flute and pipe organ during the signing of the register. I think that a CD lacks that special authenticity when compared to a live performance. Nevertheless, I realise that musicians aren't always that easily come by, and I can also understand that the wedding couple might not want obscure music that they've never heard of on their special day. Once I was playing at the wedding of a young couple, and it was obvious that they would have no empathy for Grieg's Morning Song or Satie's Gymnopédie. I was pretty sure they'd never have heard of them. Trying to think of more contemporary alternatives that would still carry the right ambience, I suggested various Disney themes. We decided upon Tale as Old as Time, which is a sublime melody and has won much acclaim. It has such a haunting melody line and was surprisingly effective on the gentler stops of the pipe organ. It was so moving it made your skin tingle. Only on the day of the wedding did I see my mistake. As I glanced at the printed order of service, I saw, to my horror, that Beauty and the Beast would be signing the register. Gratefully yours. For the full collection of Letters from the Broom Cupboard, available from Amazon in paperback or as an ebook, follow the links in the cards in the description box or find details on my website at sharonbill.com. Thanks for listening.